Welcome, low ego action heroes. This is Debbie Levitt from DeltaCX.com. We're a full service CX and UX consultancy. Check us out. And today is episode, emoji already. Hello, Charlene. Today is episode 120, Healing Conversations. Today is, who knows, July 28th, 2021, for those of you keeping track. And I'm going to queue up our guest. I am so excited to introduce our guest shortly. And I just want to apologize. I've been mispronouncing our guest's name for weeks now promoting this on the show. I am endlessly sorry. Y'all know I pronounce everybody's names incorrectly, and I've done it again. So let me finally, I need a much larger round of applause, but let me finally bring in Vivianne Castillo. And I also want to remind everybody that if you're in our Slack channel, which is free to join, pinned to the top of the general is my question: do you want to take Vivianne's course? We're all going to sign up together as a group at the end of the summer. So if you want to sign up, drop your name there, and we're all going to do it like a book club together. So I'm going to spell your name, and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and tell us all about you. It is spelled Vivianne, Vivianne, Castillo, Castillo. I'm going to have to spell humanity-centered as it's missing the vowels. You're going to have to buy a vowel, HmntyCntrd. Now give us the long introduction about who you are.
I love it. No, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I'm Vivianne Castillo. I'm the founder of HmntyCntrd. And HmntyCntrd, we are a professional growth community working primarily with folks in UX and tech who are interested in doing the personal work required to do our best professional work. A lot of folks who are part of our community are disillusioned with the status quo of what does it mean to be human-centered within our work, but also to ourselves. So we cover a variety and a range of topics, how to be more ethical in your approach to design, to how to overcome the barriers and resistances to cultural humility and competencies. And we're launching a new offering in October around more of the deeper human undercurrents and the unspoken hardships in the workplace. So how do you recover from workplace trauma? How do you overcome moral injury and institutional betrayal in the workplace? And these things that make it more difficult to be human-centered in our work. So yeah, that's a little bit of me. I'm a counseling and human service professional who made a career switch into the UX and tech industry. I'm a recovering from corporate America Black woman. I'm absurdly passionate about self-care. I'm a resident of the land where the pizza runs deep, aka Chicago. And I'm committed to choosing courage over comfort in every facet of my life.
I was going to say, where's the pizza emoji from our audience? They're throwing hearts at you, so that's beautiful. So can you tell us more about the origins of HmntyCntrd? I remember you leaving corporate America. That, for those who follow you on LinkedIn, as I do, that was big and loud and beautiful. And then what happened?
Yeah. So I started HmntyCntrd in the summer of 2020, when America was basically on fire. And, for me, it came from a place of being tired of always having to fight for people within my workplace to care about people. And so one day I was venting to a colleague about it, about just how much effort and how much I had to fight in order to challenge what does it mean to be human-centered in the workplace. And she encouraged me. She was like, hey, instead of waiting for your workplace to validate an idea or a passion or, a value that you have, why not create something outside of your workplace? I think, too, that was just like a lesson for me of, and I hope a lesson that y'all will be able to take away is like, you don't have to wait for your employer to validate your ideas and your passions. You can invest in that outside of the workplace. So, excuse me.
Drink water.
Sorry, getting too excited.
I know, I'm like that all the time. It's fine.
Yeah, so I started to build HmntyCntrd, and really it came from a place of I wanted to connect with other professionals who are passionate about this kind of work, who are passionate about more of like the deeper human undercurrent around what does it mean to be human-centered, around, yes, talking about ethics, but also talking about the role of self-care within our practice. And we launched our first cohort in September of 2020. We were named one of Fast Company's most innovative design companies of 2021 in, early winter of 2021. And we're just continuing to build and to make sure that we are people and purpose driven in everything that we do.
Amazing, amazing. I'm not surprised. Not surprised you saw some immediate successes there. So thinking about some of the stuff, let's just call it stuff, that goes on in our workplaces, how do you
Yeah.
advocate? How do you advocate, if not insist upon, human-centered design and research and practices in our workplaces that are motivated by profit and ROI? Can we find the balance here?
Yeah. I mean, gosh, that's such a tough question because, I think first it requires us to be honest about two things. One is that, the reality that we are working in systems that were originally designed to not be centric. We are often working capitalisms that are hoping that people's humanity and our own humanity isn't fully acknowledged. And so I think that's why, like a lot of times right now, we're noticing a lot of companies are trying to retrofit themselves into being more inclusive and human centered. It would almost be like if you bought a shirt that was too small for you, and like you can add fabric, you can add elastic to, you can make it fit, but it'll never really fit. And I just think it's really important to be honest with ourselves about the types of systems and environments that we're working in. Because I think when we're able to do that, then we're able to personally ask ourselves about the actual cost of what does it take to be human centric in our workplace. Oftentimes when people ask me, how do I be more human centered in capitalistic systems? Really what's underneath that question is like, how do I do this in a way that will be the most comfortable, that will be the less painful. But it's going to require us to learn how to say no and to push back. It's going to require us to learn how to negotiate and influence decision makers with a lot of decision making power. It's going to require a level of accountability within ourselves, and even just understanding that our belief that we are good and kind people isn't enough to actually be human centered. That there is a skill set, that there's an intentionality that comes with checking your biases, with making sure that you're deepening your understanding, your competencies through a multicultural lens. And I think through that, it's going to require us to adopt a decent dosage of humility, and learning how to say that we don't know, and learning how to apologize when we mess up. Because this work is incredibly messy, but I think that's a really good starting block for this work.
Great, thanks. And just a reminder to the people joining us live, ask any questions you have, throw your comments out there. I know we always have great guests, but I know people are riveted when I see like nothing in the chat room other than people waving hi. So everybody exercise those fingers and let's hear what you have to say and ask your questions. Otherwise, I've got a few questions ready that I'm going to keep throwing out at you. One that I wrote down was that we so often hear like, don't bring your personal life to work, or don't take your work life home. You should really keep these separate. But many of us experience trauma in one or both of these areas of our lives. So how do you find that the personal trauma affects us in the workplace, or workplace trauma is affecting us at home?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I feel like too, a lot of companies are like, bring your whole self to work, but not that part.
Right.
Uh,
Be your authentic
and
self,
it's
but shut up. Yeah.
yeah, be on itself, but not too authentic. Like, bring only the part that brings us money or that will impact the business. And I think before I can answer that question around trauma, I think it's helpful to kind of talk out, and tease out like what are the different types of trauma that are at play within this conversation.
Yeah.
So, there are three main kinds of what we call primary trauma. You have acute trauma. So, acute trauma, this results from a single stressful or dangerous event. This also includes experiencing an event that threatens an individual's emotional safety. So, this is why microaggressions can be incredibly harmful, and why environments that minimize their impact often end up being incredibly toxic, especially for those in underrepresented and marginalized communities. So you have acute trauma. You have something called chronic trauma, and this results from repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events. Hashtag 2020. In my previous corporate role, I mainly worked with C-level executives of Fortune 500 companies to help them leverage research in order to be more holistically human-centered in their approach to business development and design and product. And I remember talking to this executive last summer, and I was like, I think it's great that you're talking about stress and burnout, but we actually need to be talking a lot more about trauma, because globally, like, we are all experiencing trauma. And he was like, no, like, my employees aren't traumatized. If anything, they are working even longer. They're working even harder. And that's what's happening. I'm like, right. I was like, burnout is characterized by underengagement. Trauma is characterized by overengagement.
Oh, that's
And
great.
I was like,
Thank you for saying that.
what you need to, I was like, what you need to understand is I was like, our minds and our bodies will actually suppress symptoms and even memories of trauma until it feels like we're safe enough to process it. And I was like, my hypothesis is that summer of 2021 and probably December and January of 2021, 2022, you're probably going to notice an increase in people leaving their work, increase in FMLA leave requests, increase in people going on leave and vacation forever. And I was like, and part of that is because, the weather will be nicer. There'll probably be a vaccine out by then. And like the impact of trauma is going to start to surface. And now we're seeing a lot of articles about the Great Resignation, about people leaving, and people just like choosing their mental health and wellness over capitalism. So acute trauma, chronic trauma, and then the last one is called complex trauma. And this results from exposure to multiple traumatic events and often occurs within the context of an interpersonal or between people relationship. So think like family disputes, disputes with your colleagues, neglect, etc. And then also too, secondary trauma or vicarious trauma is another form of trauma. And with this form of trauma, a person develops trauma symptoms from close contact with someone who has experienced a traumatic event. So I see this the most in UX folks who work with nonprofits, who work in civic tech, or closely with marginalized or oppressed populations. And for second trauma, think of it as trauma that rubs off from you onto someone else. So it's when you tell that difficult story that a participant shared about self-harm to one of your stakeholders, and it becomes an intrusive thought later in the night for that stakeholder. Because yes, I do believe that we're also responsible for the harm that can linger when people interact with us in our stories. And then you also have something called transgenerational trauma, which is like historically systemic forms of injustice and hate. And so for me, like, how can we not look at these realities and think that they don't impact or affect the way that we work and advance human centricity in our work? And so I think that's also why I often talk a lot about how self-care needs to be viewed as an ethical imperative and a business imperative to our work as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That was a lot of trauma, but it all really made sense, and the chat room is definitely responding to it. Kayleen wrote, can we talk about what Vivianne just said about trauma and overengagement versus burnout and underengagement? I didn't ask if she, I'm asking if she has any particular question, but she actually does have a question. She wanted to know a little bit more about, someone put up Don Norman emoji. She wanted to know a little bit more about how trauma, if you know, how trauma leads to overengagement.
Yeah. So with trauma often kicks into us the survival mechanisms that we have. So when you think about in the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was working a lot more. And part of that is also with trauma, we tend to cling on even tighter to things that were normal before the trauma. Part of that falls under one of the symptoms of trauma, which is avoidance. So instead of, dealing with the situation at hand, oftentimes we try to avoid by leaning in deeper into things and experiences and rituals that we were used to before the trauma. So I think that's why in the beginning, a lot of people were overworking. A lot of people were also just, again, leaning harder into the things that how they used to be. I also think it's been really unhelpful and harmful for companies to push this narrative of a new normal, because I think it really minimizes everything that a lot of us have gone through in the last year and a half. And they're quickly trying to push us into the, okay, yeah, that was hard, that was difficult, but like the new normal, like get
It's
back
over.
to how normal was before now, because this is the new version 2.0. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think that that's how it's going to work. And for me, I think if companies, and especially within UX teams, if we're going to allow people to have sustainable careers in this, then the future of work is trauma informed. And I say that with a couple things in mind too. One is that we have 4 generations in the workforce now. I'm not hearing a lot of people talk about that. And each generation has a different relationship with them in work, as well as them in self-care and like mental health and wellness. So I'm going to generalize a little bit. Older generations, Gen X and baby boomers, I think a lot of them were taught to just kind of adjust and adopt the way that work is. Hey, it's crappy, it can be tough, but that's just kind of how it is. You have to learn how to navigate through that. And so, whereas you have Gen Z millennials, where we're more diverse generations, we grew up in a time where we have more permission to talk about diversity and inclusion, as well as mental health and wellness. And we're also like, we'll quit a job without a plan. Like, we will choose
Not
ourselves
taking that
over like
anymore. I'm out of here.
capitalism. Yeah, and I think Gen Z millennials are going to be making up more of the workforce. I think also Gen Z millennials are influencing a lot of Gen Xers who are now starting to question themselves, like, wait, why have I been putting up with all this bullshit for so long? And I think people are starting to realize that this talk track around stress, around resilience, which I feel like is a low-key gaslighting topic of like, y'all just need to be stronger. Y'all just need to endure and build resilience so you can help your white billionaire boss go to the moon and go to space. Like for me, like I think that especially as UX professionals, we should be leading the charge of what does it mean to actually be holistically human-centered, not just with people, but to ourselves in our approach to work.
It almost sounds like and tell me if I'm just wrong on this, but it almost sounds like the optimal worker has a balance of resilience and vulnerability. That there are times where situations could call for resilience, but we don't want people to feel like they have to bounce back from everything and show the stiff upper lip and
Yeah.
the brave face, and that sometimes showing that vulnerability and being more authentic is the way to go. Sometimes it's okay if you're cracking a bit.
Yeah, and resilience will look different for each person. I think what's been harmful about a lot of this corporate speak is they kind of make it seem like there's this like single bar of resilience that everyone should get to and be operating at. But again, a lot of that comes from not being trauma informed. So something else that I've noticed, and that a lot of people don't realize, is that new trauma will aggravate old trauma.
Sure.
So
Cumulative
if you're
effects.
experiencing exactly, if you're experiencing like loss of control, loss of safety, loss of psychological safety, and you have experienced workplace trauma, you have experienced difficult relationships, or maybe that has also happened, and now you're being unconsciously reminded of that, your body will also compound on those symptoms and those experiences because of trauma.
Takes you right back. Yeah, we're starting to get some questions from the chat room, so I'm going to interrupt my own questions and start putting some of them up. Clouder9, who joined us in yesterday's show, said, when working with internal teams, I often prioritize my colleagues' needs over my own, which can lead to exhaustion and sometimes resentment. Any advice to what steps I can take to work on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I making a career switch from therapy and mental health into UX, I've seen this a lot. And really what this is what you're describing is compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is the profound emotional and even physical erosion that takes place when we're unable to refuel or regenerate our energy. So compassion fatigue can include emotional, physical, and even spiritual distress. And when I'm talking about spiritual, I'm working off of Brene Brown's definition of spirituality is things that give you meaning, that ground you and give you purpose. So if you're starting to kind of like question, like, do I even like people? Like, what am I doing with my life? Like, a lot of that can come from compassion fatigue. And it often comes it will always be experienced by people where extending empathy is a key part of your responsibilities in your role. Um, and so it's also just important to understand that compassion fatigue can be comprised of multiple symptoms, including anger, resentment, irritability, having increasingly fewer boundaries between your personal and professional life, difficulty extending empathy or compassion or care towards others, and more. Um, and so again, like these are like when you start to like uh, the core feeling around compassion fatigue is a feeling of running low on empathy. You don't care as much as you used to, or you aren't as excited about working closely with people like you used to. And you have those again those moments of like, wait, do I even like people? More often than you would care to admit. And while there's no silver bullet to cure, compassion fatigue, especially when you're dealing with these hardships, the implementation of sustainable and personal to you, and that's really important, personal to you daily self-care habits can help you to manage those symptoms. And I say personal to you because you have to do what's best for you versus what everyone else says is best for you. So for some people, meditation in the sense of listening to a meditation track on Headspace or Calm might not do it for them. But, a morning ritual of making their coffee and watering their plants might be what allows them to feel fully grounded and present in the moment. And so to heal from these hardships, especially around compassion fatigue, it requires us to truly know ourselves and then advocate for ourselves to ourselves. So at the heart of healing is self-awareness and self-monitoring, learning ways to become more self-directed versus other-directed. So some of these practices that are key to achieving this include being proactive and intentional with your rest. I think a lot of times we can think about rest as being this passive thing of like, oh, I'm just laying on the couch, that's rest. But rest is intentional. It requires us to be thoughtful with how we're choosing to extend and exert energy. Limiting stressful workloads. So read into this, learning how to say no, learning how to implement better boundaries, both in your personal and professional life. There's a really good book. It's called Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Tawwab. It's spelled Nedra. Last name is Tawwab. I have my computer resting on it. That's where I'm reading. And this is a really great book on how to implement personal and professional boundaries. And then within work, it's also learning how to delegate. It's learning how to relinquish some control so that you can have more control internally. Obviously if you can go to therapy if you can afford it. But, if you aren't able to go to therapy, journaling is also another really helpful way to release the ways that your body is holding on to the stress and the angst, and the irritability and the disappointment in your life. So a lot of therapists will recommend journaling if you aren't able to go to see a therapist. Sleeping and eating well. And I know it's like, okay, I know we're told this all the time, but like, no, but really sleep and eat well and like drink water is going to be really huge and important to your recovery. And the last thing I'll throw out there is accountability. So like for example, I have like an inner circle of folks where they have full on permission to call me on my bullshit. They have full on permission to be like, hey, Viv, it feels like you are working a lot. Like, what are you doing for fun? What are you doing for fun that doesn't result to you making money? Have you gone outside in the last couple of days? Things like that. It's so important to have people who can just like love on you and encourage you to lean into becoming the best version of yourself.
Thanks. We're getting a couple of other book recommendations from the chat room. Your Job Will Never Love You Back by Sarah Jaffe. Yes. And Kayleen found the Nedra book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself. Kayleen is our resident quick researcher. And I want to tell everybody, I didn't get self-care at first until I worked on it with my life coach, who y'all met last year on the show when she did Finding Your Calling. But finally, we stumbled on, because I keep hearing meditate. And that was just something that didn't click for me, because I'm a shark. As soon as I stop working, I don't know why I'm alive. And finally, we realized that my version of self-care was putting on my motorcycle suit, putting on my helmet where I'd wired in Bluetooth speakers, and putting on a
Yes.
playlist that I love and just going out on my bike and riding. And this is when I still lived in the San Francisco area, and just going out, picking a highway and riding, going over a bridge, not going over a bridge, and just go out for an hour, sing my ass off and just ride. She's like, do that more. And I said, but now I feel guilty about carbon. I guess I'll buy carbon offsets, And she was like, didn't you tell
Yes.
me you get 48 miles to the gallon? You're better than a Prius. And I was like, I'm racked with guilt over the environment. And so I bought some carbon offsets, and I gave myself permission to ride my bike whenever I needed to get away from the world, because my bike is so cool. It made me feel like I was flying. And so for an hour I
Yeah,
could
I
go
love
out
that.
and fly and sing and just feel and see the world around me. And so I just want to remind everybody that self-care doesn't have to be meditating, saying om, lighting a candle. If that works for you,
Yes.
great. That just happened to not be me, but I found what was. And my bikes are here in Italy, and I'm still trying to get plates for them, but someday I'll be back on that. I'll be back on that road.
I
Kayleen,
love it.
thank you.
Actually just got my motorcycle license. So I'm so excited. And I just love everything you just said.
Do it. Especially if you get the hashtag not sponsored Bluetooth headset, your Bluetooth
Yeah,
speakers
yeah,
in your helmet. I still wore the
yep.
earplugs because the wind noise was too much. But yeah, let's see. Somebody else says, let's see what I'm just looking at the chat room. So we've got job losses in the past often trigger how we overwork today. We bring the anxiety forward. This was a big fear through COVID. Kayleen said, I'm
Yeah.
afraid to talk about workplace trauma openly, even after I've left that workplace. I tell myself I'll risk my credibility and reputation if I complain. I'm working at a new job now where I'm
Mm,
head of experience design, and I have some people who come to me and they have problems or concerns, but they say, I don't want you to think I'm a complainer. And I can't say to these
mm,
people enough, you're not a complainer. There is no planet
yeah.
on which I think that if you have any concern, any worry, any fear, any stress, that I'm going to tell you you're a complainer. Now
Yeah.
we've got a little culture to clean up. How can we help remind others to speak their truth and not worry that we're going to think they're complainers?
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh. That makes me sad. I mean, you're not the only person who feels that way. And I think for me, like I just recognize that there are a lot of people, and myself included, I've had these seasons of just like suffering in silence. And that is such a lonely place to be. Um, and so I think for me, especially after 2020, I'm just like, yo, life is too short to allow myself to suffer in silence. Um, and so I think, when it comes to this, I guess I'll divide it into like two buckets. Like I think that there's I work that needs to be done, and then I think there's like community work that needs to be done. When I think about I work, personal work, I think about three things that will help, kind of like combat like some of that fear around self advocacy, around talking about difficult things that you've gone through in the workplace. Because I think a lot of these systems are designed, um, again, with the hope that we don't fully acknowledge our humanity and that we're quiet in a lot of ways. And I don't mean to be like discouraging. I think it's so important to be honest about the systems that we're working in so that we can
Yeah.
figure out how to change them and dismantle them accordingly. So there's three things that I think through personally when it comes to like that personal work that I work. I think about how incredibly important it is to get really clear on who you are outside of the news. So again, getting really clear on who you are outside of what you can produce, because I think a lot of times, a lot of the corporations and the systems that we work in will try to conflate the two. They'll try to conflate who you are and the value of who you are with what you're able to do for a company and for a business. And you just have to get super clear and being able to separate the two, because I think from that comes more freedom and more permission to choose you versus leaning into unhealth and unhealthy behaviors that end up increasing our suffering. The other thing that I encourage people to do as well is to understand the way that your workplace, corporations, understand the ways that they exploit your insecurities and your childhood and adulthood trauma. Because a lot of these companies, like I believe a lot of them operate out of like they'll exploit your insecurities and the things that you struggle with. If you struggle with recognizing your validation and self-worth, they'll find ways to play into that, to make you completely consumed around getting a certain award, or your worth being tied to like a pay, a certain amount of pay raise. You
That might
struggle
be
with
where some of the
validation.
gaslighting comes in.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think there's a lot of personal work that's required to do our best professional work. Understanding what your insecurities are, and the ways that maybe you haven't been validated, or maybe the ways where you have struggled to see your value and worth, and then to see where in your work are you trying to find that, and like how are you trying to have your work fill those gaps. And the third thing under I work is getting really clear on your triggers. What are the shame-based messages that you tell yourself in those moments when you feel like you're not enough, when you feel like you're not smart enough, and you feel like you're not making enough money, you're not
Imposter syndrome.
competent enough. Yeah. And then understanding like what are those things that trigger that. Is it a tone from someone? Is it the way, is it certain like elements of critique within your design and your craft? And understanding like what those are, so that when you are triggered, your self-talk game can speak to you in kind and reassuring ways. And then the other thing, under community work or a rework, however you want to call it, is I think that so many folks are suffering in silence because they believe that healing must be a solo journey, when in reality it should be a shared one. I think a lot of times we operate out of this pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. And what that does is it creates space for shame and silence to invalidate our pain, to invalidate the ways that we're suffering. Or we'll start telling ourselves things like, well, it could be so much worse. I could not have a job. I could be in this situation. And we try to shame ourselves into gratitude. And that's just not sustainable.
Yeah, and
And
I was
so,
just saying this to someone today. I find that a lot of people who are in toxic workplaces often believe that, well, it must just be me. This must just be happening to me. I don't see everybody else freaking out or moping.
yeah,
This must just be me. And I always tell people, as soon as you start comparing notes with your coworkers, there's going to be
yeah.
other people who are feeling the same thing. And make sure you find that community and you start saying those things out loud, because almost never is it just you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Brene Brown talks about how shame only needs three things to grow: secrecy, silence, and judgment. And that it's the presence of empathy that creates a hostile environment for shame to fester and to grow. And so I think that's why it's also super important to be part of a community. And it's also one of the reasons why I love the humanity centered community, because I'm with other folks who have experienced some of these difficult things, or I'm with folks who are trying to advocate and push more human centric approaches to work, into their professional life as well. And so yeah, your healing shouldn't be a solo journey; it should be a shared one.
Excellent. Thanks. Since we're just over halfway through, I just want to remind everybody, please do subscribe here on YouTube and ring that bell, usability test that bell. And don't forget to empathize with the like button. Show it some extra sympathy, empathy, compassion, or pity. We also have the tip jar, which is always completely optional. It used to buy me cheese, but now that I'm on a diet, it's buying me chickpeas. And you can also join our Slack workspace. Sorry, there's some emojis going up because people are talking about the stress they had when they were finding a job, and then the stress that they
Yeah,
have when having a job. And it's like endless
yeah,
stress. Don't forget, you can join our
yeah.
Slack channel, which is totally free, deltacx.link/join Slack. And again, if you want to see any of the other programs that we have coming up, we've got a calendar full of stuff, deltacx.link/events. We'll dump you in Google and you can see all the stuff that we have coming up, including some August micro lessons, which are always free. This channel is ad free. I wanted to read a couple of things that came in through the chat room. Luciano said, "Thank you for all you do. It seems with tech, the division between work and not work has been blurred, leading to mental health problems for workers. Shouldn't that boundary be set again?" Louis said,
Yes.
it adds to the pressure when people going through similar mental issues and stress as you insist that what works for them should work for you too. Ouch.
Mm-hmm.
Maral Elliott says, oh my God, my two most favorite people at the same time. Oh, thank you, Charlene. And we've got Charlene giving a little donation through YouTube. It says $2.78. I'm going to assume that's £2 British. Thank you so much, Charlene. Very, very sweet of you. Eileen Redmond says, great topic. Thank you both. We're only half done. There's more coming. We've got some
Yes,
questions
yes.
coming in. Let's take a look at what Maral is saying. Or I'm sorry, I could be pronouncing your name totally wrong, so please be patient with me. And it says, Vivianne, what is your point of view on companies like BetterUp that claim to be using psychology to help organizations improve mental fitness, DEI, organizational health, for large organizations? Are you familiar with these types of companies?
Yeah, I am. And when I was at my previous employer, we actually used BetterUp. My point
Hashtag
of
not
view
sponsored.
is, yeah. My point of view is, I mean, I know people who've had great experiences, and I know people who've had terrible ones. And I think with BetterUp, it just boils down to the individual coach that you're working with. I think what's missing from a lot of these well-intentioned coaching companies is a trauma-informed lens and approach. And honestly, like, I think companies are going to have to reckon with it, whether they want to or not, if they're going to have a sustainable workforce. Because I think people are realizing that they have a choice. People are realizing that they have the ability to choose them. And so, my perspective is, like, unless companies like BetterUp and other kind of like organizational psychology coaching companies adopt a trauma-informed approach, they're going to really just be pushing a lot of the same speak that we've been hearing since like the 70s and 80s. Yeah. And like one of the best things I did for my mental health was I stopped listening to executives and celebrities on stress and burnout. I was like, y'all do not relate to me. Like, we are not having the same experience. And also, like, you're just kind of regurgitating something that you learned about stress and burnout that you saw on Instagram. So like for me, I started to tune more into books, into podcasts by therapists, started reading more about trauma therapy. And I have a couple different like trauma therapy workbooks that I've used with clients before that I've also started to use for myself. And so probably the best thing I've done for my mental health, tuning out to celebrities and companies talking about resilience, burnout, and self-care.
We've got a great comment coming up from Scott, which I'll throw on the screen quickly. He says, you have the same 24 hours in a day as insert celebrity here. LOL, no. Yeah, I love the idea.
Right?
You have the same 24 hours as Bill Gates, Oprah. And I'm always like, I don't know.
Do I have a chef cooking?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I sliced some strawberries today.
Yeah, like I'm over here literally trying to like survive.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, no, we do not have the same experience. I think it's also why I just think it's super tone deaf of companies to like interview celebrities on like burnout and stress. Like, the fuck? Like, it's not relatable.
Did you see that shitty thing that was going around LinkedIn last year? It was like Arnold Schwarzenegger tells you how you can go from, he went from nothing to being this bodybuilder. And then when and you can do it and all this. And then when I read the article on how he really developed his bodybuilding career, he had multiple coaches. He had all kinds of people, but yet he's out there giving motivational speakers like, you don't need other people. You can do this yourself. And I'm like, bitch, you had like 4 coaches and you were like this doesn't even match your own story. So yeah. Oh, it's great. Seth is here. I'm so happy to see Seth. He says, insert Simon Sinek quote. I don't even know if that's how he pronounced his name. But yeah, it does feel a bit like that.
I also love that you called Arnold Schwarzenegger a bitch. Like, that's the highlight.
I grew up on Long Island. That I had to tone my language down to get to bitch. So that's the cleaned up version. I wanted to ask you something since we don't have any questions waiting in the room that I've seen, but I want to ask, very often we're a witness at work to gaslighting, to poor treatment, to wait a minute, the boss just stole my coworker's idea. Wait a minute, that was a microaggression. Wait a minute, that's the wrong word to use for that group. What can we do as the people witnessing this? Because so often we feel like we're at companies where HR isn't our friend, HR doesn't care. Do we go to them anyway? What do we do?
Yeah, and I think part of it depends on, I feel like each company culture and the politics around HR are pretty different. But I will say at the end of the day, like HR is there to protect the company, like company first, and then like maybe you second.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of companies will kind of frame it as, no, we're here for the employee. But no, at the end of the, like, there's a reason why a lot of us, when we sign on to work at companies, a lot of us don't even realize that we sign away our right to sue the company. Like it's actually like within like
It's in the contract.
your employee
Binding
contract.
arbitration.
Yes. And for me, it's like, so if you're really about me, why is this in here?
Right. Why are you worried I'd be suing? Why would I be suing you exactly?
Yeah, and I think before you can decide what you would do in the situation if you're witnessing, maybe like a hostile like manager, or you're witnessing like a microaggression, whatever it is being really honest with yourself of like, are you willing to suffer on someone else's behalf? Because more times than not, whatever your next step is, if you are going to advocate and do something for another person, it's going to require you to be uncomfortable. It's going to possibly put you in a place where, you might experience retaliation. And so, but on the other coin of that, it also puts you in a place to start to change the culture. It also puts you in a place to start to create more of a space around accountability and care for that colleague who, like I know I've had a colleague before who they were witnessing me experiencing like a microaggression. And like as a Black woman in the workplace, I pick and choose my battles. I'm also a little bit more confrontational, so I don't mind like confronting things. But even still, like I don't confront everything because that would be exhausting. And so on this particular moment, I had decided like I'm not even gonna address it. And my colleague actually stepped up and was like, "Hey, like, you described Vivianne, and thanked her for being so articulate, but the reality is like we never say that to like white men when they speak, or white women. It's often, for like marginalized or underrepresented folks. And I appreciated that. And for me, it was like, wow, like, okay, this is someone where I can at least like let my guard down a little bit. Because it takes a lot of energy to protect yourself. I'll never forget, I was working, because of my background in therapy, I often did a lot of workshops with executives about the things that get in the way of innovation. So fear of failure or shame. Think of it like group therapy for executives. And I remember working with this one woman, and she was like, before I leave my house, I never forget to put on two things. One, I always put on my makeup, and two, I always put on my armor. And she's like, can't go to work without it. And I was like, damn. So yeah, do your part in making a space more safe, and allowing someone to just focus on flourishing in that environment versus just surviving it.
And we've got a good question coming in, so I'm going to put it up. Even though my screen's going to cut it off, I'll read the full question. Friend of the show, Ray, says, how does a very non-confrontational person navigate situations that they need to stand up for themselves while also respecting their need to protect their mental health?
Yeah. That's a great question. And again, I think what you're getting at, Ray, is one, this is more of an art than a science, because even as confrontational as I am, like I'm not like at 100, like out there fighting in the streets like all the time. Like I'm a human being, and that takes energy away from me. As someone who's non-confrontational, I think one, start with getting clear on like, what are you afraid of? Within HmntyCntrd, we talk about three different, we talk about resistances and barriers to like cultural humility and competencies. especially like when it comes to like microaggressions, and we talk about emotional, behavioral, and like cognitive resistance. And when we get to like cognitive resistance, a lot of what's wrapped up in like cognitive resistance to speaking up, to pushing back, is around fear. Fear about maybe loss of respect, fear about potential retaliation. And I think once you get really clear on like what the fear is, then I think that you can start to map out ways to work around it, or work in the midst of it. Because I don't think you'll ever arrive to this place where like fear won't be present. I mean, even for me, who's more outspoken, I definitely experience fear and a lot of anxiety when I speak out on certain things. Um, and so like, but the ways that I put myself in check in order to speak out and to continue pushing back is I remind myself, that this is more than just about me. This is about someone else. This is about making sure that the Black woman coming in after me doesn't have as hard of an experience as I do. So I check myself with that perspective. I also remind myself of like, my story or my ability to speak up in this moment might encourage someone else to advocate for themselves as well. And, a lot of times we see like other people being vulnerable and bold as like brave. But then when it comes to us, we're like, I don't know about that. And so just like reminding ourselves of like, no, like we can also be the people that we admire and that we respect. I think, and a lot of times the reasons why we're drawn to folks like that is because we see parts of them in us. We know that we have the ability to do that as well. And so my encouragement, and I often say this, is to choose courage over comfort. And it can be in small ways. If you see a microaggression, maybe it's not confronting the person that dished it out. Maybe it's, reaching out to that person and just, hey, like, are you okay? Or like, is there something I can do? And like learning like, hey, what does that person need from you potentially? Or it's, being able to, you can work yourself up from that and being able to talk about like, hey, like, I think, it'd be really great if we did this training together around microaggressions, or just even like suggestions where it's direct, but maybe not as like direct as just like sending an email to that person and being like, hey, like, you definitely exhibited a microaggression. So think about small wins too. These don't have to be grandiose gestures as well.
Yeah, obviously great points. And also for Ray, I always like to say part of me being a low ego action hero is that I might not be able to fix my own job experience, but maybe if I say something to the right people, and sometimes I try HR, even if they're not always on our side, maybe I can make it better for the person who's going to come into this department next. Maybe I can't save
Yeah.
myself, but if I can make it better for the next person, that sometimes triggers me to do something, because even if I'm not in a help myself mode, I'll end up there because I'll think, I got to do something for the future people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, my mom was in HR and she taught me at a very young age to document everything.
Yes.
So even if you decide not to confront it, document it.
Yes.
Paper trails
Always.
and receipts are super important.
Yeah, for sure. Because especially at some of our workplaces, they like to start putting in paperwork on us. And I think it's important to be first to the paperwork race. And so that's another reason why I tell people, go to HR, even if you think they're not on your side, go early with paper trail, document receipts, because if you can beat your boss or that weirdo to HR, then they look extra weird when they show up with fake stuff.
Yeah, and the other thing too is if in your complaint to HR, if you mention that you believe a certain behavior was potentially tied to sexism or racism or homophobia or whatever that is, legally they actually have to then like investigate that and like see if what was said was true. And part of that is like
Thank you,
it's
Ray.
again like knowing what language to use so that HR then has to act instead of being passive.
Yeah, there are definitely some keywords people can learn about to say to HR that hopefully will make sure they know this is something serious that needs to be addressed, or possibly systematic, or in the department. I want to read something Kayleen put up because I'm wondering what you might have to say to that. And then I do have another question I'm dying to ask you.
Okay.
So Kayleen said, I want to improve at confronting things as they happen instead of taking hours and days to realize what had actually originally happened. And any thoughts on
Yeah.
being a little bit more in the moment with some of these difficult situations?
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of the reason why people are maybe resistant to act, or not even like intentionally resistant, but why they hesitate is because physiologically they're not grounded. You know, those moments you have where, like, someone says something, you should say something, or something's kind of like off, and like you kind of like butterflies in your stomach, your heart's beating a little
Time
faster,
stops.
and you're just like, yeah, you're just like feeling that angst. I think a part of learning how to confront in the moment is learning how to quickly like ground yourself. So being able to like recognize and call out, okay, my hands are sweaty, my heart is pounding. Let me just like turn off my camera and take like a few deep breaths, and just like learning how to like quickly ground yourself so that you can then think a little bit more clearly in how you want to respond. Um, and again, part of that too is, the shame messages of like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be articulate enough in this moment, or I don't know if I'm going to say like the right thing in this moment. A lot of those shame messages, they actually activate a part of the brain that plays out those physiological, symptoms of like sweaty palms, heart fluttering, and that same part of the brain that activates those physiological symptoms is also the same part of the brain that's activated when we're experiencing trauma. And so that's why it's really important to learn how to like quickly ground yourself so you can pull yourself out of that fight, flight, or freeze mode so that you can have your thoughts more composed and being able to respond in that moment. So I would say I think, outside of like in the heat moment, practicing grounding techniques, whether that's breathing, whether that's positive affirmations, and learning how to practice that outside of like those more heightened moments. So that way, when you are in those moments, you'll be able to like ground yourself more quickly and hopefully speak truth to power.
Great, thank you. And I can tell you the chat room is very grateful for everything that you're saying. There's a lot of love going around there. We probably only have time for one more question, and it's going to be mine. There are no questions in the chat room, but it's going to be mine anyway. And thanks again to Ray for the super sticker. All donations accepted, and of course they go to Healthy Chickpeas this month. So one question I'm burning to ask you is, so often we hear about accountability. You say it, I say it. Everybody claims to want more accountability, but I've started having some conversations with people where they've turned around and said to me, well, what does accountability look like? Other than firing someone for something egregious or completely unacceptable or so out of line, when there are these things that are happening at work, the small traumas, the large traumas, the microaggressions, so conflicts, what does accountability look like when we're not going to fire that person?
Yeah. Well, one of the first things that comes to mind is, until the lack of inclusive behaviors are treated as a performance issue and not a personality issue, then things won't change. I think a lot of companies, when they talk about microaggressions and all these things, they kind of slide it off like, oh, it's personality. Oh, it's just how they were, the upbringing. But what if we actually viewed, inclusive behaviors as a performance capability or performance competency? So for me, that can play out in a couple ways. I think a lot of times, the ways that we are evaluated and then promoted, there isn't a competency stream around inclusive behaviors. There isn't a competency stream around our ability to implement diversity, equity, inclusion into our practice, not only within like our products, but also within our teammates. And then because of that, it's also not weighted as something, it's not weighted as being an asset to the business. Even though a lot of these businesses, excuse me, will talk about it as an asset, there's no accountability. And if you want accountability, you have to tie to people's performance. If you want to tie to people's performance, you have to tie to people's comp. Like, that's how people, especially within capitalistic systems, start to recognize what's valuable to the business and what's not. So, we have, for example, within the humanity-centered community, like, we have member share outs where once or twice a month, members will share out things that they're doing and pushing within the workplace. And we had a designer And then we record them, and people can revisit them even if they join Humanity Center at a later date. But we had this one designer present how they reimagine their competencies within their design teams. And they actually created a competency stream around inclusive behaviors, around, hey, if you're at a level 8, if you want to go from a level 7 to level 8, you also need to develop skill sets in cultural humility and competency, and recognizing diversity in your work and things like that. So I think that's one way to do it. And it's probably going to be one of the biggest ways to do it. I think accountability can also look like, if your workplace is not at a place of, doing that and implementing that, it's creating that paper trail that Debbie and I were talking about, and being able to, because after a while, like HR will actually, if they start seeing like an X amount of like cases or like issues, they'll investigate it. So super quick story, like there was a very problematic leader within, my former employer, and a group of us got together and we're like, hey, like we actually like, this person needs to be held accountable because they're like really problematic. And so we started just telling people who were aware of the situation to file a case, file a complaint against HR. And that caught a lot of momentum, and that person ended up receiving a disciplinary action. And so like that, sometimes a little like organizing is like really helpful with that. And then personally, because I think this is like a 2-spectrum thing. Personally, I think accountability requires like humility. A lot of people say they want accountability, but they actually don't. Yeah. They don't want to have to humble themselves. They don't want to address pride or even just areas of ignorance within
look at their own behavior.
And I think that's a huge part of doing this work well that I think is often overlooked. It's kind of like, I see a lot of people go into therapy or become therapists because of the ability to grow and to work on themselves too. And I honestly see like UX as being something similar, where like, what if we actually practice what we preached around being human-centered, around caring about people, and around like the personal growth that's required to achieve that with ourselves. And so that's where, with accountability, it's humility. It's having people in your life that you trust will give you honest feedback, and that who you can be vulnerable with. And I think also with that, like I have found it so helpful to have those folks not be in the same industry as me. It's been life-changing. Because like if all your inner circles are like within like the same industry, I think sometimes it gives away to more blind spots.
Yeah, so like when you talk about your inner circles, I mean, I assume you mean your personal life. Like, for example, my best friends are people this channel will probably never meet because they've got nothing to do with UX. One guy works at a famous guitar company. One person isn't working in anything right now. One person is like financial risk management at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. Like, you're never going to meet my real inner circle because they've got nothing to do with CX and UX. And so I guess get more varied peeps around you.
Yeah. And I do have my inner circle when it comes to like, my professional friends, where I can just be like super unfiltered with. And even with that, I think a lot of them tend to be, I'm really well connected in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space within tech. So I know a lot of heads of D&I, and I feel like, again, even that it's UX adjacent, it's CX adjacent, which I found to be really helpful.
I think we're going to squeeze in half of a question from Kayleen, and then we're going to give our closing remarks. Kayleen was talking about some of the typical onboarding and corporate training people get, like sexual harassment training and things like that. She wants to know, do you feel these are actually effective at reducing workplace trauma?
No. Yeah. I think a lot of it's because they are curriculum that we've been using since like the 90s. Like we haven't been innovative or creative or intentional in, I think, a long time when it comes to like trainings around that. And so I think like I see a lot of companies who, we're having an issue with this. Let's hire Accenture. Let's hire McKinsey. And it's like, okay, but you have already hired Accenture and McKinsey before, and we're still having these problems. Maybe we should, I don't know, switch it up. Maybe we should work with consultancies that are run and owned by marginalized, folks from marginalized and underrepresented communities, because they know how to better navigate some of these issues. They're more willing to be honest about some of these issues. But no, I think more times than not, it's a checkbox. But I do think we're at a pivotal point where companies are realizing that they actually need to try. And if they don't try, then they're going to have a talent crisis. And I fully expect companies to be struggling from a talent perspective for the next like 5 to 10 years. I think it's an exciting time for people to choose them. It's an exciting time for people to actually like start to hold these companies accountable, which is also why I think companies are like, none of this work from home crap anymore. Get back into the office because we are losing control.
Yeah.
And I'm rooting. I'm excited for this season. Like I think my hope is that the experience of work will be better for the people coming in after us because of the things that we are willing to do and fight for today.
The remote workers strike back. We are unfortunately out of time. Thank you so much. Can you believe the hour just flew by? So, Vivianne, please tell everybody, where can they find you, follow you, stalk you appropriately, buy something from you? Where is all of it?
Yes. You can learn more about HmntyCntrd and the live community-based cohorts that we're doing at humancentered.com. If you type in even just like that fully with all the vowels, it will reroute you to our website. We have our Humanity-Centered Masterclass coming up in September, where we'll be talking about inclusive and equitable design, the role of self-care in our work. And then in October, we're offering our new offering, Healing Conversations, which is built in partnership with a licensed therapist about how to overcome workplace trauma, how to overcome moral injury and institutional betrayal. And what does it actually look like for you to bring more of your authentic self into the workplace? So you can learn more about me at humancentered.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active and vocal on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Twitter. It's V Castillo 630. You can see some of my thoughts and musings on there as well. And please feel free to reach out. I will do my best to reach out back. My inbox is like a trash fire right now, but I always get back to folks.
Yeah, thank you for that. And don't forget, everybody, if you are part of the Delta CX Slack universe, which is free to join, we've got a pinned post in the general channel asking who wants to sign up for one of Vivianne's courses, which she was gracious enough to offer us a little group discount. Let's get a whole bunch of us together and let's go through this course. I think it was one of the on-demand courses we had chosen. Let's go through it together as a book club where we can discuss it in our Slack world and do it. So I was looking at maybe having us decide who's going to be part of that by the end of August and then sign up for September. So if you want to be part of that, get over to the Slack channel, make sure you get your name in there, say something. Don't just drop an emoji or give me a reaction in Slack. I can't tell if that means you are doing this or not. So be clear and join us so that we can do the book club version of one of the courses. Thank you so much for being here and giving everybody your the truth bombs was a word I saw more than once in the chat room today. And for really, really helping people to help each other and help themselves. And that's the beautiful thing, the gift that keeps giving. So I'll play us out of here, but I'll see everybody in the next stream, which will be tomorrow. And hopefully we'll see you soon. And let's you and I keep in touch.
I love that. Thank you so much for having me. And for everyone else, take care, stay safe, and have a good rest of the week.
Thanks. Wear 17 masks. Bye, everybody. Customer centricity as business intelligence. Visit deltacx.com to learn why we are